This is OffPlanet Radio.
Hey everybody, welcome back to OffPlanet Radio. We are doing an audio podcast only this evening, and before we get started, I just want to thank everybody, all the patrons and all the nice comments and feedback and stuff we've been getting. We've been having a lot of interaction lately. We really appreciate it. We have a lot of new patrons, and we just, from the bottom of our hearts, want to say thank you. This has been really much more, like we've gotten much more out of this, just than we expected to, and we're really enjoying meeting all you guys in the patron group chats and all that kind of stuff. So, thank you. And Randy is still on vacation, but I have an awesome co-host for tonight, and really looking forward to this one. She was on our show earlier this year, and she and I have struck up a weird and wonderful friendship since then. And I was very sure that I wanted to have her as a co-host when I knew Randy was taking a month off. So everybody, welcome back, Niish from Nox Mente. Niish, welcome back to OffPlanet Radio.
Yay! Thank you, Emily. This is a great pleasure. I've been looking forward to this since you mentioned it.
Awesome. So we just decided, we tossed around talking about some things, but we decided our conversations are so fascinating and interesting and really weird that maybe we'll just do that and let everyone listen and see what comes up for people. And we'd love to sort of hear back from you on some of the stuff we talk about. So we're just going to kind of get to that. And just before we start, how's everything going over at Nox Mente, Niish?
Really well. Jerry's just booking amazing people. Jerry does all the, it's kind of like a princess setup, because I kind of just show up and he's set up everything. And so we have some awesome guests coming up. We have had some recently that were just mind-blowing, some new information, new dots connected. Emily, you and I have talked about some of these, and things that I have not thrown out publicly that I'm waiting to have information come back to me, part of why Nox Mente started. And something did come back to me recently, and with Joe Root, actually. And it's exciting and validating. Oh, cool. So Nox Mente is rocking.
I'll have to go check out that show and see if I can figure out what we're talking about here.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I've hoped as soon as I at this point, I'm super busy and I don't have as much time to pay attention to all the things I used to pay attention to, but I do hop in here and there. But I think we talked about this when you were on the show last time, the most interesting part about this is going to be sort of, the cross-referencing and looking at the similarities of people's dreams and what is going on here and who's who. And that kind of, as a long-term sort of thing to look at. So it's interesting that you're starting to get some things looping back to you. And, that's one of the things we love doing with the show is just putting out little bits of stuff, you know what I mean? Not like we're trying to keep information from people, but it's in order to figure out if something is just the creation of your mind or if it's a reality, you have to sort of throw it out in a way that only people who knew what you were really talking about would respond to.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, even look at how Cliff High does it with, he doesn't like to dirty the water with his webbot by talking about stuff. So there's a purity in it. There's not hiding, you're not hiding something. This is pure energy and pure information, and you want that to come back to you. Yeah.
I even have some people who aren't even guests or anything like that. Some people who are just people in the audience or people from our Patreon group chat that I have interested in having certain conversations with, but I haven't even approached them about it yet. Mm-hmm. Drop little hints, and I had someone come back to me. So there's a conversation I've been wanting to have with someone, but I haven't exactly said that. I said, let's chat, but I didn't say what about, and then it didn't, I've been busy and it didn't work out. And then the other day she sent me a message wanting to talk about the thing that I would have wanted to talk about with her, but she would have had no way of knowing that.
I love that. Yes.
And so we do that too, just to kind of see, what people are feeling out there and what's sort of, and I don't like the word trigger, but what's triggering what in people. I'm not trying to trigger anybody, but we're trying to figure out who's one of us? You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. That's the thing with the word trigger too. I mean, I used it a couple times in our pre-talk, and it's like I always try to find the right word. Trigger, everyone understands that right now, although I think it has a negative connotation.
Totally.
But activate is another word for it, but that can be too strong sometimes. So it's, I don't know, our language is so difficult.
Both trigger and activate are things that, happen to people in mind control kind of situation.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So, I've tried to play with stimulate a little bit, or it's hard. You want to be really careful with language because I get suspicious when I hear people using a certain kind of language as me, and I've gotten to the point where I can kind of parse out just based on their energy and sort of what's going on when it happens, like whether that's their intention or not. But it is. We need trigger warnings for the trigger warning.
I know, right? I mean, I've even used ping. It pinged me. Ping. And I mean, there's, so it's difficult. Just the language alone, navigating is a challenge at times.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, you're deserving of the princess setup. I like the idea that Jerry does all the work and you just show up and do, and I sort of enjoy that about the situation.
Oh, thank you. I always am worried. Like I have this fear in the back of my head that he's just going to get sick of being Mr. Do Everything.
No, he and I have never talked about it, but I can just tell energetically that he adores you and he loves doing this with you. And his, there's no, he's totally into it.
Yeah, so, we do have a really great relationship. I feel quite grateful in that respect.
Yeah, no, Jerry, you guys obviously do a show together, but I see Jerry as a person who's here to be a cohesive bond for the community in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Sort of keep an eye on everything. And I don't agree with him about everything, but if something bad and yucky and funny is going on, he's going to know it. And he's going to be like, all right, what's going on here?
Yep. And there's always some jokes there. He's always got some wit. I love that.
Yeah, he's very funny. He doesn't take himself too seriously.
No.
And which is good because no one else does either.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm kidding.
And he's super open. I think for people that my needs for people around me is that's a quality. Like a lot of things I don't, whatever, but you have to be an open person or to be close to me.
Yeah, I completely... obviously, you and I had a very open conversation before we started.
Yes, we did.
It seemed to make it better. So, there we go. It's just, Niish and I have been chatting for quite a while before we got started here tonight. So
it's so easy to do, Emily.
Yeah, we get into it for a long time sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, after you guys were on the show, we did get some comments, somebody was like, oh, we want you to please do an 8-hour show with these people, make a show that never ends with these people. And then some other people, there was someone else who was like, I guess this ends my private theory that Jerry and Niish and Emily and Randy are the same people. Like they thought, I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I was like, okay, well, please play with that. That's, you know what I mean? I was like, so that was funny. And so people loved when you guys were on. So we'll do that again sometime too.
Yeah, and we have Randy on here soon.
Yeah.
On Nox Mente.
Yeah. That'll be interesting. Randy's, we talk about dreams sometimes, not a ton, but we do talk about sort of other level experiences a lot, and the area between sleep and wakefulness, and it will be interesting. We talk, he has a very interesting way of describing some of these spaces and whatnot. I look forward to hearing that. I think it'll be really awesome.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it as well.
Randy's been on break, and so he'll probably have a lot to say. Sometimes he doesn't have a ton to say. He's obviously not a man of as many words as I am. But sometimes he just has a ton of really just absolute, everything he says is fascinating, but when he hasn't done it for a while, then you think you guys will get a really good show. So that'll be awesome.
Yeah, I can tell it's going to be good.
Yeah. So, all right. So one of the things we've been talking about, when you were on the show last time and you and I, our last conversation, we got really further into some of this, idea of this octopus kind of thing, this octopus entity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that happens frequently is once I sort of talk about something on the show or talk about it with a lot of people, then suddenly it's just showing up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen nothing but octopi everywhere since our conversation.
There's something about that whole observation, right? That double slit experiment where the act of observation and part of observation is actually talking about something molds the experience too. I just wanted to throw that in there because I feel that that's part of it. And it's part of the bigger thing that I feel is going on here.
Yeah. I mean, it is weird. Like it's sometimes whatever this is, whatever we're in, whether it's a simulation or what the fuck it is, I don't know. Like
some sort of dreaming.
Or some sort of dreaming or some combination or sometimes one and sometimes the other. Like you can talk about whatever happens. I talk about it and then it comes to me. And sometimes not in exactly the way I was thinking of it, but in an undeniable way.
Yes.
I had something just today, you know what I mean? Like somebody told me a really funny story yesterday, right? And almost an exact replay of that story came to me at work today with something else, right? And I was like, this is nuts. You know what I mean? Like it was bizarre. And I had something, a couple of weeks ago, I've talked about it on the show and I told you about it with the chick with the that was, from Orange is the New Black.
Yes.
Whatever. It's coming fast and furious right now. But the octopus has been like, so from the moment we talked about it, I told you when we were just talking privately after that, like we talked about it in terms of the guy that you had on the show who ate the octopus and whatever.
Yes, Ren Collier. Yeah.
And it made, what was his name again?
Ren Collier. He's fascinating.
Yeah. And so then I talked about the story of the thing with the back of my neck and how I was feeling like it was something like that. And after we talked about it, I had really intense attacks of that all for like almost a week afterward. Almost like whatever it was knew that it was being talked about. Right. And it was new versions of when I would used to get it, when I would get it normally, it would be a couple times a week, really intense, strong for a couple minutes. So I had some of those, and then I had this one thing where it happened 3 times in one day, but like little mini versions of it, right? And then all of a sudden I met somebody who did a healing on me, like, about a week and a half later, and like it was the distance healing, and I kind of didn't really think anything would happen, but it hasn't happened since. Like I've been like a couple, you know what I mean? So I've been a couple of months out from it. It was like in April. It's been like 2 months, and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Like both that, like it came on intensely afterwards, and that I've been, experiencing this healing from it. But as soon as that happened, as soon as we talked about it, I started seeing them everywhere. I had noticed it before, like we talked about that when you were on. But like literally, I would see every restaurant I went into had something. Every store I went into had something. Like to the point, and it's not just like your standard looking octopus. These are like really crazy looking ones. Like I showed you a postcard last time we talked.
Yes.
And they're like super it's like somewhere between like an octopus and like a bat or like some kind of manta ray, or you know what I mean? Like some kind of really, I don't want to say nasty, but some kind of really like otherworldly. I mean, octopi are otherworldly looking anyway, but we have the image that we think of them from when we were little. And this is not quite that. This is like much more, has a lot more layer to it, Yeah.
The ones I experienced didn't have quite, like they were different. That was my dog, sorry. Yeah. Didn't have, they're not exact. Octopi is as close as I could get to describing what they are, because they had tentacles, but they didn't have that like bulbous head, but it was still, like something there. Yeah, so they're not quite. So the octopi gets your mind into that right area of visualizing it, but they're not quite as we know octopi to be here.
Yeah, these things seemed like much more like whatever vision I had of octopus when I was younger for most of my life. This is something that seems like it could spread out much wider. Like, like it has more like a blanketing kind of body and energy.
There's they seem I'm trying to do, oh man, they're just so hard. Actually, okay, so I'm sorry to kind of switch a bit. I wanted to ask you if you've heard other people talking about them before I get more into the way I experience them and the way that information's coming back to me about them.
So, it's a little hard because I talk to people who listen to the show, right? So
right.
I get, oh yeah, like we're experiencing the octopi too. People have told me they're seeing a lot of things with tentacles and rings on them. Like a lot of people, we've talking about how they're showing up on every fucking menu now. Like it used to just be you get like octopus at a fancy restaurant. Now they're like on menus everywhere. And then, people, and we can get into this somewhat, I want to hear what you have to say and then we can kind of divert into this somewhere, but it's also become connected somehow to some of my work on vaping because, the people are, somebody has brought to my attention that people are making these videos of themselves vaping, like tricks and literally like, I don't know. I think I sent you some of these videos blowing.
They're pretty amazing, actually.
Right, blowing like entities, a lot of which look like squid or octopus or jellyfish or something, rings into existence. So I want to get to what you say first, then we can like get over to that a little bit later. But there is like, people are talking about it and I'm noticing it. I mean, like the weirdest part for me is the place I've noticed it the most is in the town that my mom lives in. It is a beachside community. But I've been going to the beachside community. She's lived there for 20 years. I've never noticed this stuff before. And a lot of the places are new. So it's not like it was always there. But it's almost like, feels to me like there's a rule that there has to be an octopus in every establishment. Like I see one everywhere I go there. And sometimes it's like in a weird way that doesn't make sense. There's nothing else nautical themed about the place, right? But there's this fucking weird octopus thing there somewhere. So that's the way it's been sort of occurring for me. What's going on for you with this?
Well, I am, oh man, I don't even know how to parse it out. So just to recap on the experience I had is I saw them entering people and so there are other, so if you picture yourself in a dream, you picture yourself in a lucid dream, and I'm talking base level lucid, where you're just aware that, you're aware of your environment. Yeah. And it doesn't need to be anything more than that. They have access there somehow through the etheric net. And the takeaway here is that they enter through our orifices. Now, if this was, okay, so we're talking about symbols, right? Open holes is a symbol. And so like, for example, I was seeing them going through ears, mostly ears, but sometimes nose and mouth. And I mean, I saw a very graphic one in a mouth, and it was so graphic. I actually thought that it was eating the person, but it wasn't, because then it got in and took over the person. And you saw this in a lucid dream? I saw this in something way more than a lucid dream. Okay. It was like waking life. So this is a problem with dream language. Everyone seems to have an idea what dream language is, and there's one person will tell you that all the experiences it's all lucidity. It's just layers of lucidity, right? And then someone else will say, well, there's astral projection and there's out of body and then there's lucidity. And this is part of why I say, keep an open mind. I will walk with all the different terminologies and language, but for me, it does make sense more that it's all states of lucidity, just like here. Yep. And so, but this was active, awake, feel, sense, smell, cut, bleed, that kind of thing. And they were etheric. They were tangible in a way that I could see them, but they were also like vapor, like smoke, like formless smoke in a weird way. They would form, but then they could dissipate. Yeah. And that tied into, for me, when you brought the idea of vape smoke, I hadn't even made the connection. And so that's like a new pondering for me. You sent me those videos. I'm thinking, wow, I think that Emily's made a dot connector here, for me at least. Yeah. I don't know what the intent is, but it doesn't seem to be good. And the thing that was the overarching theme in this first experience I had was that it's already happening. It's been happening a long time.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that some of us are now seeing it because things are getting the absurd nature of what the reality that we're all collectively somehow participating in.
Yes.
Is bringing that idea of lucidity. So how many crazy freak storms do we need? How much craziness do we need in the outer world before we say, am I dreaming? Right?
Yeah.
And then when we start questioning the fact of, is this a dream? Are we dreaming? Now, and I just want to step away from, if this is a dream, where are you really? I'd love to get into that later, but for the context of this, there's an idea of, okay, so there's a lot of call to lucidity, like in your dream time that you think of. Weird shit makes you go, whoa, I'm dreaming. Well, how much weird shit do we need right now, people? Because it's crazy, and it's continuing to be crazier. I was just looking at, the hailstorm that brought that plane down, and I'm looking at these big hails from today that they must have formed so fast. I don't know. They look like bullseye rings, and just so much stuff. And I'm wondering, where is this coming from? So why are we collectively, a bunch of us, obviously people watching our shows, both of them, and a lot of other people that are questioning things, what's the difference between us and them? And the thems I'm talking about are the people that seem to be sleeping. And I don't want to be separatist in that. I'm talking about people that are not aware. So possibly infected by this octopi being, that I get a feeling that it's kind of hive mindish. Mm-hmm. And so for me right now, currently, this will probably change, and I allow myself to change. There's some sort of, like I said, hive mind to it. And one of the symbols in the dreams that was happening is my ex-husband, Scott, was so unusual that he would ever look me up and try and find me and all this. But because I have a lot of attachment to him, at first in my Jungian head said, oh, unresolved issues, he represents this and this. But then as I actually became really hyper aware and awake, he was still there and not a figment of my unconscious. And he was also not him. One of those had gotten in. And the takeaway from that is not about him at all. It's that people we know, people we may trust, people we are trusting with placement of power in our lives, mm-hmm. are somehow possessed. And I say possessed in a very open way because these things somehow gain access to us, to our energetic field, mm-hmm. and are controlling them. So I'm not negating that the person is out or how, soul taken out or whatever. I don't know. I don't have answers for that. But there's somehow, it's like the mycelium mm-hmm. underground, how it's all connecting and talking. Mm-hmm. And there's some sort of connection to the way these things look to me that looked vaguely like fungus I have seen in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't said that publicly because I wanted some of that information to come back to me, and some of it has. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't only me thinking this and experiencing this. So I'm laying all this at your table right now. That's kind of where I'm at.
I have a lot of things to say, and hopefully I wish I never have a notepad by here. I wish I would have had a notepad to say them all. So I'm just going to, I'm just going to tell you a couple things, and then so we make sure I hit them all. I want to say something about yeast, fungus, and parasites. I'll say that later. I want to say something about some of my experiences with octopi and where I think this octopus kind of thing started. When did this start to become a thing? I want to say those two things. I want to talk about something that showed up in a healing for me just recently, and then sort of separate, and later we can get into the vaping. We can move from the octopus into that and why we're talking about that and whatever. So let's try and hit all those things. So first, let's start with where I think this may have like started or come from, or when it got ramped up. Like I started, and I count myself as a person who possibly has been at some point these things trying to get me, and at some points may have had me. You know what I mean? And that like I think we're all susceptible to this stuff, and I think it. I don't think it's necessarily like a permanent sentence. You know what I mean? But when I first really got into dancing popping, one of the things that I'd say maybe around 2003, 4, 5-ish, like I had this, maybe even earlier, this desire for my dancing to look like I had multiple arms. Like I wanted it to be like I had 8 arms, like an octopus. Like I do a very like geometric style of popping that is sort of like, it's called tuts, but I don't do it like according to the traditional way people do it. I infuse a lot of tuts and a lot of stuff that looks a little bit like voguing. And if you watch those, you've seen voguing, right?
Yeah, I actually know what kind of popping you're talking about.
Okay. So
I think we're close to the same with Jen, at least.
Okay. So you like that kind of stuff too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I remember it well too.
Yes. Very good. Okay. That's the whole thing. So when I do it, it feels very ancient to me. It feels like something I've been doing through all my lifetimes. You know what I mean? And it's so I sort of fuse like some sort of like popping and liquid kind of stuff with some tutting, and then stuff that if I had more flexible shoulders, I would be wanting. I'd Vogue. I love when that Madonna stuff came out with Vogue. I was like, I'm so taken with that. I couldn't even believe I liked the sort of swagger that those dancers had. And just the way that like it looked like they just had thousands of arms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Arms were long, you could do all this stuff, and I'm just not flexible in the shoulders from issues with my neck and from being super strong and tight from gymnastics and then not stretching for a number of years. But if I could had flexible shoulders, I'd be fucking voguing. Like I love that shit, right? I love watching voguing competitions. You know what I mean? Like it just is fabulous to watch to me. But I love that idea of I wanted to have multiple arms. So that's a Shiva thing, but that's also an octopi thing. And at the time, I remember there was this one popper that I used to like to watch called Cephalopod. And I was like, oh yeah, I love that. You know what I mean? And that's sort of more
that says it all too.
Cephalopod.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, so there's a thing. I'm not, like that's a thing here. So like this is probably part of the influence that's trying to be pushed into the dance music community and the popping community or whatever, right? Like, I'm wanting that. And I did see some videos early on of myself dancing, and it did sometimes look like I had 4. Like more, I could make it look like I had more arms than I did. I never quite got the look that I wanted. You know what I mean? At a certain point, I sort of abandoned trying. But like when I'm in my like best, like in my mode, in my groove and whatever, like I still think about it. Like, you know what I mean? I still think about it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that like, like, okay, there was some influence that either was trying to be pushed in or that I was just drawing in or attracting. And how much of that has, and I've spoken ad nauseum about, mind control and dance music and, things that they're trying to do there. So there's probably some kind of connection there. You know what I mean? So that's a thing. But I'd say about the same time, maybe a little bit later, was when I started paying attention to, I would watch some of these like shows on Discovery Channel or National Geographic, the deep sea shows, and they would have, I saw information about these octopus that could, like, I think we talked about this last time you were on, even a little bit, maybe these octopi that could match any, like their skin could change in 1 second to match whatever, like.
Yes, the camouflage.
Yeah, and they even like would put them in an aquarium and put like these incredible geometric patterns and crazy shit that wasn't anything to do with nature, and the octopus skin would do that. I was like, that's fascinating. So these things so with that in mind, I wasn't thinking this then, but I'm thinking it now. These are the perfect like predator or invader because they can make themselves look like you and just slide right in.
And if you think about a mushroom,
mm-hmm.
the head, so these don't have like the white mushroom cap or anything. They have it's more like a thumb, I guess.
Yeah.
The head. But if you buried buried all the tentacles and you just look at the top as like a mushroom, like with a mushroom, there's all of that going on under the surface.
And some of the, I know the kind of fungus you're talking about, and we can get into some of that, like when we get into talking about how this relates to some of the candida.
Yeah.
But it's like incredibly, it's not just 8. It's like an incredible amount of tentacles, and some are thick and some are thin and some are wispy. And is that what you're talking about? Like, are we talking about
yes, but when I saw these, I didn't count because there was kind of an urgency. Like they witnessed me observing them, and it changed the behavior, which is something I'm always harking back to. And I could just tell they had tentacles. I didn't stop and count, but it was enough that it made me think, in the ballpark of 8, several.
Okay. And so, so so I had that. I mean, think about that though, the way that these things can camouflage themselves, right? Like they could, like, you can see energetically better than most people. I can, there's people have varying levels of gifts about that, but the average person, like, doesn't even know that that's a thing to look for things that look weird, right? So like it could literally be on someone's face, about to enter their ear, about to enter their nose, and nobody would know because it looks like their face.
It's camoed, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought about that when you were talking, and then I thought about, about the same time was when there was that story about like that octopus that had died, and was like they pulled it off the bottom of the ocean, and it was like, or came up to the shore, and it was like the biggest one anyone had ever seen, right?
I just saw that.
To me, that shit looked like it was big enough to swallow the whole fucking world.
I'm still in awe of it.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's all floppy and gross looking, because it's dead and whatever, but it's like, what the fuck, dude? Like, that shit is in the ocean. People are worried about aliens coming from space. Like, that's silly shit. Look at that thing, dude.
There's a long history in Mariner, like sea creatures, and with cephalopods, giant squid, giant octopi. So it's already out there in old school literature and in poems and in some songs. It's like it's just been waiting. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that death of that one then seems to have been when more of this stuff started coming in. I started noticing it in artwork. You know what I mean? Like I started noticing it like, almost like maybe that was a sacrifice of one to bring in the energy kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Or to show us.
But it was, like, I remember watching that thinking, God, that thing is just fucking massive. You know what I mean? And like, it was just, and then you had like during like the banking crisis, like 2008, 2009, Matt Taibbi from Rolling Stone, who wrote those great articles about the whole situation, talking about Goldman Sachs as like the vampire squid that was like sucking the life out of humanity. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so that just brought like a visual to like the social, like what was going on socially, that even though he said vampire squid, and have you seen a vampire squid?
I haven't actually seen them. Are they for real?
Yeah, well, like I don't know if there's such thing as really a vampire squid, but there are these squid that like, I mean, maybe it's all squid, but we think of squid as not being that big, but there are some that are huge that like the way they catch shit, and there's people who have even gone missing. Like they have this one big tooth that comes like that's where you would think like the head of the octopus or the squid is. It's inside there, and it shoots itself out and it grabs shit and sucks it up back in.
Oh, geez, gives me the chills.
Right. Yeah. Like I was watching one of those, like, shows about shit that happens in the deep sea. And there was like a fisherman that like fell off his boat and like got pulled by one of those things. And you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. And I'm just like, wow. And the ones they were showing were big, but not that big. But like, I'm imagining if there was one that was like the size of this kind of octopus, like it could pull a whole fucking boat inside. You know what I mean? Like it was just kind of incredible. And it's, the octopus down there are scary. And then we can get into this maybe round back after we're done with the octopi and the vaping, whatever. I was talking to someone yesterday also about sharks, right? And, when you put these things together, octopi and sharks, and sort of what they do and what they're like and whatever, like, the sea is a much more scary and interesting place than this nonsense space they keep trying to distract us with.
Definitely. There's so much there. I mean, it's not even, yeah, I mean, we could talk about the sea for hours. It's and especially like with the UFO stuff too, the
Yep.
stuff that the submergible stuff and all this information that's coming out is very fascinating to me, because there's something in my mind, I'm not sure what it is, in my logical mind that says this is more logical than outer space for some reason, and yet it's like as above so below, really, in the end. But
have you watched any of those kinds of deep sea shows where they're like down on the bottom and you see all those animals that have like bioluminescence?
yes, I'm fascinated by them, where there's no light and they put off the bioluminescence.
They look like so they look like space. They look like very spacey, right? They look like something you'd think you would see in space.
Yes.
And my only experience, and I've talked to other people who consider themselves to be abductees, right, about this. My only experience, I don't have the feeling that I've been abducted by aliens. I do know what the inside of a ship looks like, though. And I don't know if I know because I was in there or because I remote viewed it. You know what I mean? So, and whatever I saw had a biological element to it. It, like, obviously there was high technology there, but it felt biological in nature, and the lighting on it, at least on the inside, felt bioluminescent as opposed to our version of what we think electric or neon or whatever looks like, right? And the inside was much bigger than the outside. Like, on the outside, it looked like, from the outside, it looked like, or at least my sense was that it was like the size of standard kind of, thing you would think a UFO would be, like maybe at biggest, like 30 by 30 or 50 by 50, right? At the biggest. But inside it was almost endless. Like this, like it was like a shopping mall or a football field or something.
Right.
Yeah. And, it felt as though the walls of it were like breathing or like inhaling and exhaling or moving. There was movement. It wasn't, it looked sort of metallic, but it had suppleness to it. And the colors were like, they're not, the difference between the colors you see in the psychedelic space and the colors you see out here trying to imitate what you see in the psychedelic space, right?
Right.
Like,
yes.
There's a different, like, you can look at neon light, neon signs or fluorescent colors or very vivid and bright colors. And with technology, they're getting better and better and closer. But there's not the level of information or emotion attached to the colors that there is in the psychedelic space.
They're different, but they are getting close. I mean,
Getting close, yeah.
It makes me think of, as I had said earlier, with the giant stuff they're pulling out, and in particular the octopus. It's what it's doing is it's telling us once we see something, then we can go, we know it exists, right? Everyone's like, I gotta see it. Well, so a giant octopus comes out of the ocean. And then there was, that movie, whatever, where they were kind of octopi creatures too, but they were gigantic also.
Are you talking about Arrival?
Yes, Arrival.
I wanted to bring that up because when you were talking about the thing that you saw, it made me think of that. I think you and I were talking about this last week when we had our chat.
Yes.
Yeah, just go ahead and say what you want to say, and then I'll tell you what I was thinking.
So I want to say, like, so this is coming, and of course, this, as I said earlier about the stories of the giant octopi taking in the ship and in paintings and in horror and Lovecraft and so it's out there, and then we pull something real from the ocean, allegedly real, right? And so our mind, the suspension of disbelief now is engaged. This could be real. And so now it's tied into all the stuff that we've been front loaded with the tales and then Hollywood stuff. And suddenly we start to have a collective experience of this. Although I will say the ones that I experienced were small. They were like, they were small, and they would get into people or on them, so the symbols I'm seeing in the outer world are exaggerated, as generally is observed in these kinds of sleight of hand maneuvers that happen with just storytelling. Like, for example, a play or Hollywood, or even writing a good story, you exaggerate things for that effect. So all I'm doing is creating a foundation here for where I think you're going now.
Yeah. So
with the vape and that in the arrival stuff.
Yeah. So when we were, we were talking about this in our chat last week, and it's been coming up quite a bit. Like, I get a lot of discussion around the movie Arrival because the necklace that I always wear looks like the ship. Right?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Yeah. And so I had not heard of the movie. Like, the first time I had any interaction around this was I had not heard of the movie. And my friend called me and said, "Oh, I just, watched this new movie that came out." He got some, burnt version when it was still in the theater. He's like, it was really good. It was about, this fucking alien stuff, but their ship looked just like your necklace and whatever. Right. He's like, "Go Google it and look." And I did looked, and I was like, "Oh, wow, it does. That's funny." And then people started saying things to me like, "Oh, your ship has come for you." Right. And all that. So it was kind of funny, but I didn't see the movie until 6 months ago. And
same here. It's recently that I've seen it.
Yeah. Enough people had told me, "Oh, you'd like it. They're communicating telepathically. It reminds me of some things you talk about, this and that and the other thing." And so I had no idea what to expect. I went and watched it, and it was not at all what I expected. Right. It was very, ethereal in some ways. I expected there was going to be aliens in the ship and the people are communicating telepathically, and I thought it was gonna be like a typical alien movie, right? And it was just happened to be that the ship looked like mine.
Yeah, as did I.
This was something completely weird and different, and this was about a communication that happened in a very smoke vaporized environment, right? That people had to have protection before approaching, and that was about these creatures that looked somewhere between an octopus and a spider. And that they would sort of move forward and present themselves, create these sort of sigils that contained a lot of information. And even when I was looking at it, I was feeling emotionally activated by the sigils, even though I had no idea what they meant. You know what I mean? And it was like some kind of dye or squid ink or something kind of thing, but it was in this very vapory kind of environment. And it was, affecting the, physical field and the emotional. People were having emotional responses. It was affecting their physiology. Some people could go close for long periods of times, others couldn't. And it was, ultimately there wasn't, to me, a lot of resolution as to what they wanted. It was clear they were trying to impart information and understanding about something and whatever, but it had this whole, it had the world or whatever, this community, completely captivated for a short time, and then it was kind of just over. And I felt so that was weird, but there was this really deep, eerie, ethereal, very just weird sort of tone to it that I was like, "Okay, that's really weird and interesting." And some of those, I think this is what you're talking about, sort of what we are talking about here. And what are these? They make these rings that have information in them, right? And that imparts information. And you're talking about the holes on the body as being symbols. Are they creating sort of sigils that they can then come through? I've talked about this with sort of some of the experiences I've had with sacred geometry when I'm dancing, and that if an entity can if you're projecting geometry and the entity can line itself up with that, if you don't have, if you're not sort of blocking or guarding your geometry, it can come through. Is that what this is? What do you think?
I think that I want to say something. I think it's interesting that it's almost dark here, and I've got all this commotion going on outside as we're talking. It's uncanny. I do this show with Jerry I'm always on. This uncanny that this kind of commotion's happening.
Yeah.
What I do think, though, is regarding this is I'm wondering how much the dreaming within the dreaming. So that we're having this experience, and in the dream, I'm in where I feel like the function of this is completely directly related to this, but it might sound like it's not at the first. So we dream, we go to bed and we dream, and that somehow in that state, we allow ourselves to be open to anything that can happen, the whole dream landscape, the rules of the dream. And in that, those of us that are actually capturing and waking up in the dream, becoming lucid, whatever, pulling back information, bringing back information, are able to see bits of reality that our alleged waking mind discards and can't see. So that whole, the spoon is on the chair. And so the idea of and I'm hearing about other people encountering similar things like Rin did when he took it off of himself, or he felt it physically in his bed, but he was in kind of like a hypnagogic state. And then the symbols, the geometry that lines up within what is this kind of etheric dream state, is giving me personally the vision. And now I come into my waking life, and I've started to sense this feeling I get when I've seen them in dreams around people. So for whatever reason, I've tied a connection between here and there. And in the way we understand things anyway, now at least, without like being woo-woo, I'm awake and then I'm dreaming. That's the etheric realm. There's now a portal between the two, in my mind at least, where I'm having a conversation. Now I encounter these people in the world that formerly I was kind of calling NPCs, right. But I'm open. I'm open to anything, and I will use language, and I'll see where it takes me. And and now I'm starting to see this kind of this connected to these things, this fungus, this octopi, this vapor. And I had woke up, and I saved this for the show. And I haven't told you. I woke up the other day from a very intense experience, and the words on my mouth was, and I know this might sound cliche, but they're everywhere. That's what came out. I was in a cold sweat, and again, it was that whole coming out. It was like coming out of a 3D chamber, like it was in my auditory, my ears. I had to take a minute to come back into my body. It was so visceral and intense. I'm in a cold sweat, and my conscious mind says this to me out loud. They are everywhere, and because I've been sensing people that. Since I started playing around with the NPC dialogue, and also trying to be sensible about it, like so saying it's not the NPCs aren't flesh and blood and they're not having emotions and stuff. It's just that their program's so limited, and you start talking depth with them and they're just not there. And so I'm not saying they're not real, and so now I am forming this idea that it's this kind of fungal takeover. And these things are conscious, and they're definitely using sigiled symbolic language that is everywhere in our waking world, and tuning into, vibing within the symbols that individuals use on themselves, like an octopi does with its whole masking ability. So you want to wear Nike, shoes, you're inviting that in, right?
Well, also, what about the tattoos that people have on their body?
Yes. Well, I mean, how can that be? I mean, really chew on that.
Right. Well, I mean, I started to, I have some tattoos, and I didn't get any for a long time. And I went through a phase where I was considering getting some tattoos, and of course, like being into the geometry, was thinking about that and whatever, but I never did it. Like something in me was like, don't do it. You know what I mean? And then I had the experience where I, realized that like how they lay down a lot of these mind control programs is through using sacred geometry sigils on your chakra points. And that's actually where the programs are stored, right? Like there's compartmentalization in your mind. Some of these programs, or sort of the blueprint from for the programs, are stored in the chakra points. And they are these geometric, very complex geometric patterns. And so I was like, okay, like, yeah, no more tattoos. And then I came to a spot where I recognized that the tattoos that I already have are like brandings, right? Are like
yes,
entrance points, or they're very important to the specific programs. And so you also said something interesting, which I've never heard anyone else say, and I think it's great, like a great way to describe it. You said toning in, right? Because so much of this is about tone. Tone in terms of sound quality, tone in terms of color, tone in terms of vibration, tones in terms of the emotional feel of something. Like that's what, like when I'm feeling like stuff is weird these days, the reason I'm feeling like it's weird is not because of anything drastic. It's because of a certain tone to it. It has a tone to it that, like,
yes,
a person that didn't have good vision might not see, or a person who, you know what I mean? Like that's what we're dealing with here. And what is that sort of like, what did you take, just winding back real fast, and then we can go somewhere else. Then of course 50 million more things are coming up while we're talking.
I know that always does.
So what did you think the point of that movie was?
So I hadn't been exposed to the movie, and I talked about that dream with some friends, and they said, when the movie came later, when the movie came out and all this, they're like, you need to check this out. And I don't like to do a lot of, so with my friends in my personal life, and you, like, I'll talk, but like I wouldn't want in public, I don't like to muddy the waters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just didn't, I was blown away. I guess simply just simply blown away. I think I didn't even know where these things were kind of exactly like I've seen them, but they were large. They're way different, but it was the whole idea. So they were basically the same symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what blew me away. And the fact that they were in this misty environment that was, it was part of how I was experiencing how they were moving, and just blown away. And so, and again, I think I said it earlier, is I think that it was, whether or not it's intentional, whether or not anything is intentional, things synchronistically line up. And it seems like once we are actively observing, and if you think about this in terms of, are we dreaming or are we not dreaming? What are we doing? But the act of observing how it changes the nature of things. And this is in modern day science, double slit experiment, and on the quantum level. And so I just can't help but think how we're I feel lost here for words. I'm
like how that movie brought this into people's consciousness in a way that now they can begin to observe it.
Yes, but the thing that seemed sinister about the movie, even though the movie wasn't sinister, and really what was sinister in it was humans, of course, and which I don't disagree with on that. But I'm looking now at thinking a lot of people are possessed by this kind of energy, Candida, all that, is that they made them like they were friendly. And clearly my experience is not. They are parasitic.
Right. Yeah.
So they're not friendly. They do not have our best interest at hand. We are a means to an end in my experiences with them in the etheric level via dreaming within the dream.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing I want to hit on, we'll continue this in the next hour. Before we go into the private hour, I do, because we've brought it up so many times, want to hit on a little bit of this with the yeast and fungus and candida and stuff like this. So, obviously, like, candida is something that's been, it's a human condition, and it's been around for a long time, but it's been coming up more and more, and it's become obviously the problem and the cause of a lot of almost all sort of health problems. And people are starting to pay a little bit more attention to it. But this whole thing with that you're seeing these things that are sort of mushroom-like, my feeling with all of what's going on, the candida is some kind of operating system. Like the yeast and the fungus is like a communication, like a network, like cables, right? Like network cables, and it carries, or like the operating system of the computer, right? And then you have yeast and fungus sort of overgrows, and then people start to develop parasites. And I feel like, so parasites are generally wormy looking creatures, but if you look at them, they look like they could have been a broken off piece of a tentacle, or, an arm or a leg from one of these sort of
yes
kind of entities. And they love sugar. Like yeast and fungus thrive on sugar, and parasites fucking love them. And if you starve them of sugar, they will die, and they will do everything possible to take over your mind and convince you to eat sugar so that they can be alive. And of course, within my theory, the sugar that they're eating is programmable matter that is programming them to do what they're going to do, right? So is it possible that parasites in the body are sort of like, I've talked about this in other ways, but it's the receptor, or if there's like some kind of telepathic communication between, if it's like a tentacle broken off, or it's some sort of like baby amoeba version of an octopus, or some sort of lesser version, you know what I mean, that is in the body. Like they're trying to get this stuff. I mean, when the entity comes in and possesses people, does it necessarily have to stay, or can it just go in there and lay these little things and come out, right? And go off and, do it to another person. Like we don't know how many of these there are, right? And so is it possible?
And can I interject here?
Yeah, please.
So it's like anything that gets out of balance.
Yeah.
So like I innately just feel that these are not good because they treat us, they feed off of us and control us. But it's at the same time, I do believe everything has its place. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'm going. I'm going to mute because there's chaos. I'll let you talk.
Yeah. So I hear the ambulances in the background, which is interesting. I'll tell a story about that in the second hour.
Yes.
But no, I mean, I agree. Everybody has candida in their body, and when it's in the right level, it's just part of the natural flora of nature. Yeast is natural, all that kind of stuff. Parasites should not be in the body. Parasites are like the part of this that is questionable. Parasites are like the cockroaches in your house, right? Like you get spiders, you get bugs, you probably shouldn't kill them. It keeps nature in balance. When you have an invasive species that has an agenda of its own, which the parasites do, or even what yeast and fungus does when it starts to overgrow. And I think we talked about this last time you were on, where, listening to Paul Stamets talk about how fungus really behaves much more like an animal with its own consciousness than it does like a plant, right? So like the fungus having some level of consciousness, and then these parasites coming in, I don't know, I'm not able to fully close the loop on this here, but you get where I'm going with this? Like we're dealing with sweet, sugar, yeast, fungus, and then in the movie and in your visions and in, some of this, it's this sort of misty kind of environment, which is like vaping environment, which we're going to talk about in the second hour. But like, it feels like, and we have fucking chemtrails and, weird stuff like that. It feels like they're trying to make this a habitable or hospitable environment for whatever this is.
That's an important, I actually have to jump in on this, because the overall, on that very first one I had, the whole thing led back to they were taking over. And the whole thing was like kind of like terraforming. Yeah. And for whatever. And so like the visuals in the sky were, the chemtrailed sky, it was gray, and it was an intentionally smoggy environment, and it was smoggy enough that they were able to move around freely like they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I observed them, the ones that I saw in that first dream in this like store, and the clerks were on the ground, and I at first glance thought they were being eaten by them, and I realized no, they were attaching themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And because when I, later on, the clerks were fine. So there's that. There was this, and everything got down to the fact that they were terraforming enough that they could walk around kind of almost like an openly.
Right.
So I don't know if if this is like a call towards the fact that they can't handle light. I don't know if the symbol is for the chemtrails and vaping. The symbols were there though. These symbols were all there, and it's like it wasn't friendly.
It's like they need the same kind of moist environment that fungus thrives in.
Yeah,
like mold and fungus.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering, from your description of the clerks on the floor, do these things have the ability to temporarily put somebody to sleep or knock them out so that they can enter them, and then the person just kind of wakes up and feels like, like what just happened?
Yes, they were unconscious. Somehow they were unconscious. And okay, so the energy I got from the one that I actually had the little communication with that was outside, because there was that one in Scott that was clearly communicating with me and knew everything about Scott enough to say things. It was accessing his neuro pathways and his brain. And so, but the one that I had so I saw the two, but the one that I had, I don't want to say eye contact because I didn't notice eyes, but it noticed me noticing it. And, we noticed each other. Yeah. And, it didn't come off itself as like maniacal. It's doing its thing. It wasn't like we have a master plan and we're here to take over Earth or something like that. It wasn't crazy like that. It was literally like the environment was right, whether or not they did the environment, but it was doing its thing. It's like stumbling upon a wolf eating a bird, right. Or, it was doing its natural thing. And so it wasn't, I can't stress that enough. It didn't seem to actually have ill intent, but it was ill intent to me because I look like even though it was a guy on the ground and I'm a humanoid, and the person it was going to inhabit was a humanoid. That's to me a threat. Yeah. That's like, okay, your species is feeding off of my species, and that's a threat.
Well, that's the whole thing with parasites in general. The parasite's point isn't to kill you, because then it needs to use you as the host. Right. But so it's not necessarily doing a vicious, malicious thing, but it's doing its thing, whatever it needs to survive.
Absolutely. It goes back to that old meme of the spider and the fly. What's chaos for the fly is normal for the spider.
Yes. Yes. Wow. All right. So we will continue with this into some other parts, and I think more and more things keep popping up that are related to this. So I'm trying to keep this straight in my head. But,
I know, me too.
Before we close out the public hour, tell people where they can find Nox Mente, how they can listen to your show, all that jazz.
If you just type in the easiest way, I wasn't even prepared for this. The easiest way is just go to YouTube and type in Nox Mente, Noxmente, and that'll take you to our channel where we have all the stuff, including interviews Jerry and I do. And that's the easiest way. And I'm sure Emily will have that in the show notes.
We'll have that linked for sure. Yeah. All right. So for those of you who are saying goodbye to right now, thank you very much for joining us. And for the patrons, we will see you on the other side. We'll be there in just a minute. Hang on. This is OffPlanet Radio.